Hi honeys, welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, I'm Ruti, aka Talia's Threads. I'm a self-taught sewist and bag designer, and I write sewing patterns and tutorials that help you create bags that celebrate your personal style. Today we will be making the mag bag, which is my first ever bag sewing pattern, and it's going to be the medium size in this viral leopard denim that you've probably seen everywhere, and I bought 1 yard of it from Fluid Plus Drape ages ago, and I've been waiting for the perfect project. So let's get into it. Just a note before we begin, there has actually been an update to the mag bag pattern. I added the stabilizer panels to the pattern with the seam allowance removed, and I completely rewrote the instructions just to be more user-friendly. I put more information in there for you. So all of the files are in Etsy, so you can just go and download it now, but feel free to get in contact if you cannot access those files, and I will send them over to you. The first step is going to be to take all of the pieces that are getting some foam stabilizer and mark in 3/8 of an inch from the edge so that you know exactly where to place the stabilizer, and then fuse it to the wrong side of the outer pattern pieces using the manufacturer's instructions. Okay, now all the pattern piece prep is done, so we're ready to get into the instructions. Now this is completely optional, but I really love the way the quilting looks, so I'm actually going to quilt some lines onto these pattern pieces before we move forward, but it's up to you whether you'd like to do that or not. These are just quilted with parallel lines, 1/2 inch apart. Step 2 is to create the pocket, and we're going to fold it in half, right sides facing, and then stitch all the way around the edge with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, but we're going to leave a gap here of 2 inches or 5 centimeters, and that's how we're going to turn the pocket the right way out. So along this edge that has an opening, press the seam allowance open so that once we flip the pocket it will lay nicely and we can easily top stitch it. You don't have to trim the seam allowance if you don't want, but I'm just going to trim off the corners. And then flip the pocket and just use a point turner or something pointy to push out the edges. And then give it a really good press so that everything's sitting nice and flat. And then top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the edge just to close up the hole. Place the pocket onto the right side of one of the lining triangle panels, and I've just cut around 3 sides of my pattern piece and then folded the pocket out of the way, and I'm just going to place it on like that, and then you can just pull that away. And then you're just going to stitch around the sides and the bottom to hold the pocket in place 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. Now it's time to connect the outer and lining triangle panels, so we're going to flip the outer over to the wrong side facing up, and then we're going to put the lining wrong side facing down onto that, and just to hold them together while we're getting everything else ready, we're going to stitch around the edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance just to hold everything in place. So you can put these aside because we're going to move on to the strap. Of course you can make your own strap, but I am going to be using this strap webbing. This is nylon webbing, 1.5 inch wide. And the next step is to cut your webbing into sections. So the D-ring section is 3 3/4 inches or 9.5 centimeters, and you need 2 of those. For attaching the micro bag you need 15 inches or 38 centimeters. For the strap for the micro bag, 6 inches or 15.5 centimeters. And then for the adjustable section, you need 40 inches or 100 centimeters. Now you can set these aside for now and just keep your D-ring sections. Now I'm using these triangular shaped D-rings. They work in the same way, so the strap goes through here, and then whatever you're going to attach, in this case the lobster clasp will go through this bit, but it works the exact same as a normal D-ring. So thread the D-ring sections through the D-rings and then fold them in half so that the D-ring is attached in the middle, and then just baste the end at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then once you've done that, you can set this aside as well, because we need to create like the top panel before we attach these. So the next step is to attach your zipper tabs to your zipper, and we're going to place the outer zipper tabs right sides facing on the right side of the zipper, and then the lining zipper tab right sides facing with the wrong side of the zipper, so that once we fold them all back, the right side will be facing out on both sides. And then just sew across the short end at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Just a note on the length of the zipper. So if it says, for instance, the medium that I'm making, it requires a 7-inch zipper. So if you're using zipper tape or you need to cut a zipper down to size, add 3/8 of an inch on for the seam allowance on both sides, so 3/4 inch total, and then sew so the distance between the zipper tabs is 7 inches. So now I'm going to fold the zipper tabs back and give them a press, and then just top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the folded line just to hold everything in place. So now we're going to attach the zipper panels to the zipper, and to do that you need to mark the midpoint. Now you can do this with pins, or you can just clip into it like I am. So fold in half lengthways and just give a little snip. And then do that to your outer and lining zipper panels as well. And now you are going to just place the zipper right sides facing with the right side of your outer fabric, and then you're going to place the right side of your lining to the wrong side of the zipper and match the middle points. Don't worry if there's some overhang on the zipper tab, we can just snip that off once we've attached everything. Now just sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance with a zipper foot. Now just fold back the zipper panels and give them a press. And then we're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from this folded edge to hold the zipper in place. Once you've top stitched that in place, then you can just repeat that for the other side of the zipper. The zipper panel is complete, but all we need to do now is trim off the edges of the zipper tabs. And if my lining is overhanging here, so if you have anything like that, just trim that off. And then these D-ring panels that we made a minute ago need to go on the short edges of the zipper panel, and just make sure that they're centered. You can mark it or you can eyeball it, but just make sure they're centered, and then baste them at 1/8 of an inch so that they stay in place while we're creating the rest of the bag. So now the zipper panel is finished and we're ready to attach the gusset. So we're going to take the outer gusset and place it right sides facing with the outer zipper panel. And then we're going to take the lining gusset and place it right sides facing with the wrong side of the zipper panel. And we're going to sew across the end here at 3/8 of an inch. And you can go one side at a time, or you can do both sides at the same time. So now we're going to fold the gusset away from the zipper panel, and you can sort of like flip it so that it starts to look like a full gusset. Now just give the seam a press and then top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the folded edge. This is an optional step, but it does help when you're attaching things. I am just going to go and baste together the lining and the outer gusset. Just use a long straight stitch to hold them together at like 1/8 of an inch seam allowance so that it'll be hidden when we sew it onto the triangle panels. We're going to work with one side at a time and have your triangle panel with the right side facing up, and then take the gusset and turn it inside out. So we're going to match the notches. The 2 notches on the top match up with the seam lines on the zipper panel, and then the middle notch right at the bottom will match up with the bottom of the triangle. And then there's 2 more notches which you'll be able to sort of like match them once you've matched the others. And it will look like the gusset is too small, but just what you need to do is clip into the seam allowance. Just do a few clips around each curve, only go in a 1/4 inch so that they won't create any holes in the bag or anything once it's sewn. But yeah, if you clip in, and then you should be able to just sort of like spread out the fabric and it should fit perfectly. Okay, so the gusset is all clipped in place, and now you need to sew around the edge with 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance. And I do tend to change over to my zipper foot because I find it helps me get closer around the tight curves. But obviously if you have a method that works, then please do that. Okay, so now check that everything's looking beautiful and repeat for the other side, but don't forget to open the zip before, otherwise you won't be able to turn your bag right sides out. So now I'm just going to turn the bag right sides out and check the other side. Make sure everything is looking beautiful. And then we're ready to move on to the bias binding. Just fold the end of your bias binding in and start with this folded end. And what's going to happen is when you sew all the way around and then overlap with the raw edge, you'll fold the bias tape over, and then the folded edge is going to just encase that raw edge, and it's going to look really nice and neat. Okay, the binding is all finished and we're ready to birth the bag. Now just make sure to really push out all the corners and make sure everything's laying really nice and flat. And you can see it's like a little puffy right now, so I am just going to get the iron. You don't have to do this, it's just because I used like a thicker fabric, but I'm going to just press the edges so that they stay nice and crisp, and then also have some little threads hanging out here, so trim those off. Okay, I'm going to put my bag to the side because we are ready to do the strap. So take your micro bag attachment section, so that's the 15-inch or 38cm section, and we need a rectangle ring, a lobster clasp, and a D-ring. Now I'm using a slider because I don't have a rectangle ring, but I'm just going to treat it as if there isn't a middle bar. Take your strap and put it through the rectangle ring, and then you're going to put it through the D-ring, and then fold over the bottom 1.5 inches, and you're just going to grab the D-ring in the end like that, and then fold it over, and the rectangle ring should be at the top like that. And we're going to do a box X stitch in this gap between the two bits of hardware. The stitching should look like a little X inside a box, and you might need to go over some of the lines to get the cross, but it's just a really secure stitch and it looks really nice as well. Now we're ready to attach the lobster clasp, and we're going to fold this to the back twice, and then we're going to do a box X stitch here to hold that in place. Now take the longest piece of strap, and we're going to need a lobster clasp and a slider. So we're going to put our strap through the slider from the back through to the front, and then from the front through to the back, and then fold the raw edge under, and then you're just going to stitch along that edge to hold it in place. Okay, so the slider is stitched down, and now we're going to take the lobster clasp and we're going to feed the strap through the lobster clasp and then back through the slider from back to front and from front to back, and then once you pull that through, you have your little adjustable section. Now we can attach the two sections together. So I'm going to take the open end of the section we just made and then fold it through the rectangle ring towards the back, and then fold over the raw edge. And then once you've clipped that in place, you can do a box X stitch to keep that secure, and then the strap is finished. I've cut out the placement marking here so that I can just easily draw through it. Now I'm going to take some double-sided sticky and stick it around the edges to hold the strap down to be sewn, because it can be really difficult to get pins in with all the layers, and obviously you can't get clips in from the edge of the project that far in. And then fold the strap so that it meets each other, and you want the bottom edge to be folded over like 3/4 inch. So once you do a box X stitch, it's going to catch both the bottom fold and the top fold and secure it all in place. And then just put your lobster clasp through the top. And make sure that the raw edges are meeting. Also, if you're using a nylon strap, you can also melt the ends to stop them from fraying. I haven't had much problem with that with this strap that I'm using, but sometimes it can be really tricky. And then just use your placement line to stick that on. I've paused you. This is a note from future me because we all make mistakes, and you'll notice I'm adding the strap like this. Obviously we're further along in the process, but that means that the strap is upside down. So the lobster clasp and strap needs to be facing like towards the middle of the bag so that the bag can hang once it's finished. And then just do a box X stitch to secure that all in place. Okay, so now you're going to need the zipper for the micro bag, which is 9 inches or 23 centimeters long, and you're going to place it right sides facing down onto these little tabs on the micro bag, and we're going to sew across this end with 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance. And you can do them one at a time, but I'm just going to clip them both and sew them both at the same time. So now that the zipper is stitched down along these tabs, you can fold it back and then just give a little top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from this folded edge. So now we're ready to clip the zip around the edges, and this little tab you want to just fold it so that it aligns with the edge of the bag. And we're going to hand baste this around the edge first. Because it can be very tricky. There's going to be a lot of fabric puckers around this tight curve, and if you go straight into sewing it on the machine, I don't think it's going to line up properly. Now this doesn't need to be pretty, just do like a rough running stitch to hold everything in place. And I'm using a contrasting thread so that I can easily see it to pull it out, but if you use a matching thread then maybe you could get away with not pulling it out. I'll leave that up to you. And around this tight curve, I do let my stitches get a little closer together just to really hold everything securely. I went ahead and sewed both sides by hand. So we're just going to go and sew all the way around both sides at 1/4 inch or 0.6 centimeters. I've just stitched around the edge and I'm going to take out the basting stitches. We're ready to flip this right sides out, and then you're going to want to press in the seam allowance towards the stabilizer so that it's not getting in the way of the zipper. Oh my god! Okay, now that is fixed, we're ready to do the lining. We're going to sew a straight stitch around the edge at 1/4 inch or 0.6 centimeters. I'll fold the short ends of the tabs in by 1/4 inch and press. Now just give that a top stitch at 1/8 of an inch or 0.3 centimeters. Now fold the tabs right sides facing with the side seams. And we're just going to sew this down at 1/4 inch or 0.6 centimeters. Okay, now we're going to iron the raw edges using the stitching line as a guide towards the wrong side. So the seam allowance is all pressed in, and all I'm going to do is insert that into the outer of the bag. So I'm just going to stitch through the zipper and through the lining and try not to come through to the outside with my hand stitches. And then you are finished. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you loved this tutorial. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you gave the video a like and subscribe to the channel. And of course, if you make a mag bag, make sure to tag me on Instagram. It's at Talia's Threads with 2 underscores.